The burlap sack in the bank. The cool weight of the brass handle greeted Elijah as he entered the First National Bank, its massive doors yielding with a muted groan. An olfactory cocktail of aged wood, entrenched wealth, and a whisper of lemon polish hung in the air. Sunlight, fractured by the crystal chandeliers, danced across the polished marble floor. He tightened his grip on the burlap sack at his side, its rough texture a familiar counterpoint to the worn fabric of his tweed jacket. Instead of the teller window, a beacon of lacquered blonde hair directed him towards a mahogany desk in the corner, identified by a brass plate. Mr. Sterling Bartholomew III, President. The bank president appeared distinctly displeased. Bartholomew was an assemblage of costly components, a bespoke suit that likely eclipsed the value of Elijah's humble abode, a silk tie adorned with miniature sailboats, and a gleaming silver Albert chain draped across his vest. His countenance, however, offered a less refined picture, a landscape of fine lines carved by disapproval and an excess of spirits. A chair was not offered. "May I be of assistance?" The query dripped with preemptive dismissal. Elijah placed the burlap sack on the desk's edge. The muffled thud momentarily disrupted the bank's quiet atmosphere. "I believe you can. I'm here to reclaim what's rightfully mine." Bartholomew's eyebrow arched, a gesture brimming with condescension. "And precisely what treasure might that be?" Elijah opened the sack. Within, protected by brittle, yellow newsprint, lay a document secured with fragile twine. He unfolded it with painstaking care, each movement accompanied by the soft crackle of aging paper. "This indenture. To this very establishment." He slid it forward. Bartholomew didn't deign to touch it. "You're mistaken. The Bartholomew family has controlled this bank for generations." He steepled his fingers, his gaze fixed on Elijah with thinly veiled impatience. "You're wasting valuable time." Elijah's voice remained even, a low timbre that masked the tremor in his hands. "This deed predates your generations. It was awarded to my great-grandfather, Caleb Freeman, back in 1888, for services rendered to the town during, shall we say, challenging times." He avoided the harsh language of that era. Bartholomew, with a cursory glance, finally picked up the deed. "This is absurd. A blatant forgery. Leave. Immediately." He tossed the document back. Elijah didn't react. He reached into the burlap sack once more, this time producing a slim, leather-bound volume. He opened it, his finger tracing the faded ink. "First National Bank, established 1888. Initial capital, $20,000. First loan issued to Silas McGregor for agricultural equipment. Sum $500, repaid fully, with interest, within 6 months." He paused, his gaze meeting Bartholomew's. "Second loan, extended to Bartholomew and Sons Mercantile, to facilitate expansion of their dry goods enterprise. Amount $2,000, guaranteed by, if I'm reading correctly, Sterling Bartholomew I?" A flush crept up Bartholomew's neck, staining his face crimson. "How? Where did you obtain this information?" Elijah closed the book, holding the president's gaze. "This bank was forged on more than mere currency, Mr. Bartholomew. It was founded on trust, on civic spirit, on agreements." The final word hung in the air, heavy with implication. He carefully gathered his meager possessions, the burlap sack once again secured. "I shall return, Mr. Bartholomew, armed with more than just a deed and a ledger. I shall return bearing the unvarnished truth." He turned and exited, the heavy doors of the First National Bank swinging closed behind him, leaving Sterling Bartholomew III struggling for words, caught between disbelief and a burgeoning, chilling comprehension. A reporter's instinct. The shouting echoed across the polished marble floor of the First Meridian Bank, cutting through the usual hushed reverence like a shattered vase. Sarah Jenkins, perched on a plush velvet bench pretending to admire a particularly uninspired landscape painting, lowered her newspaper. It was a flimsy excuse, really. She was waiting for her contact, a disgruntled teller who promised information on the bank's shady loan practices. But this was better. She discreetly activated the voice recorder on her phone, tucking it deeper into her purse. A tall, thin black man, dressed in simple work clothes, stood facing a man who radiated wealth and privilege. Sterling Bartholomew III, Sarah recognized. His picture was plastered all over the society pages. Bartholomew's face was crimson, his voice booming. "Get out, Freeman! You're delusional! This is my bank, my family's legacy!" Freeman, Elijah Freeman, judging by Bartholomew's tone, didn't flinch. His voice, though quiet, carried a steely resolve that somehow cut through Bartholomew's bluster. "The records tell a different story, Mr. Bartholomew. And I intend to rectify the historical inaccuracies." Bartholomew jabbed a finger into Freeman's chest. "Historical inaccuracies? You're speaking of slander, Freeman. I could have you arrested." Freeman simply looked down at the offending finger, his gaze unwavering. "Arrest me for what, Mr. Bartholomew?" "For claiming what is rightfully mine." Bartholomew sputtered, his face darkening further. Security guards began to converge, their eyes fixed on Freeman. He didn't resist as they escorted him towards the exit, his head held high. Sarah waited until the commotion subsided and Bartholomew disappeared into his oak-paneled office before approaching the security desk. She feigned concern. "What was all that about?" Poor man looked so distressed. The guard shrugged, offering a practiced, tight-lipped smile. "Just a misunderstanding, ma'am. Nothing to worry about." Back in her cramped apartment, Sarah replayed the recording. Freeman's quiet defiance resonated with her. Rectify the historical inaccuracies, claiming what is rightfully mine. What was he talking about? The Bartholomews had owned First Meridian for generations. It was practically synonymous with the city's history. Intrigued, Sarah pulled out her notepad and started transcribing the key phrases. Something about this felt bigger than just a disgruntled customer. There was a raw, almost desperate, honesty in Freeman's voice. She needed to dig deeper. The next morning, armed with her scribbled notes, Sarah headed to the city's main library, a grand, old building smelling of aged paper and forgotten secrets. She navigated the towering shelves, her fingers tracing the spines of dusty volumes. Local history was her first target. She devoured books on the city's founding, its prominent families, its economic development. The Bartholomews were everywhere, their name etched into the city's progress. But something felt incomplete. There were gaps in the narrative, whispers of shady deals and ruthless acquisitions. Hours blurred into a montage of microfilm reels, archived newspaper clippings, and handwritten ledgers. The library was a sanctuary of quiet rustling and hushed whispers, a world away from the polished arrogance of First Meridian Bank. As evening approached, Sarah stumbled upon an old, leather-bound ledger tucked away in a forgotten corner of the archives. The title, barely legible, read, "Meridian Land Acquisitions, 1888 to 1910. Her fingers trembled as she opened it. This might be the key. Digging in the archives. Dust motes danced in the single shaft of sunlight slicing through the gloom of the Oak Haven Historical Society. Sarah Jenkins coughed, adjusting the scarf she'd wrapped around her nose. The air smelled of decaying paper and forgotten dreams, a scent that both repelled and fascinated her. Stacks of bound ledgers loomed like ancient monuments, threatening to topple onto her precarious work surface. She'd been at it for hours, cross-referencing property records, old newspaper clippings, and tax assessments, chasing the ghost of Elijah's claim. So far, the ghost remained elusive. She rubbed her tired eyes. The bank, First Oak Haven, had been established in 1903, built on what was then considered worthless swampland on the edge of town. Elijah claimed that land had belonged to his great-grandfather, taken through deception. The bank's rapid success had cemented its power, its history scrubbed clean of any inconvenient truths. A shuffle behind her made Sarah jump. An elderly woman, her silver hair pulled back in a severe bun, stood regarding her with narrowed, surprisingly sharp blue eyes. She wore a cardigan the color of faded lavender and sensible shoes. "Looking for something specific, dear?" the woman asked, her voice a low, gravelly rumble. "Just researching the early history of Oak Haven," Sarah said, trying to sound casual. The woman raised a skeptical eyebrow. Everyone says that. Usually, they're trying to prove they're related to a founding father to get into the garden club. Sarah smiled weakly. Nothing so glamorous. I'm a reporter. Just looking into some old land deals. Land deals, eh? The woman leaned closer, her gaze intense. Those can be mighty dirty things, land deals. She paused, then added, I'm Evelyn Reed. I volunteer here. Been cataloging this mess for, well, longer than I care to admit. Sarah introduced herself. I'm investigating the history of First Oak Haven Bank. Evelyn's expression hardened. That viper's nest? What business do you have poking around there? I'm trying to understand how they acquired the land they built on. Sarah explained. There's a claim being made. Evelyn considered her for a long moment. Humph. Well, you won't find it in the official records. They were meticulously curated. Look, check the Orphan Land Claims Ledger from 1902. Back corner, bottom shelf. It's bound in faded green leather. Good luck even lifting it. Sarah followed Evelyn's directions, the ledger heavier than she'd imagined. Dust billowed as she opened the brittle pages. Row after row of names, descriptions, and dismissed petitions swam before her eyes. Hours passed, the only sound the rustling of paper and the occasional sigh. Just as despair threatened to engulf her, she saw it. A handwritten entry, barely legible. Petition of Silas Jefferson. Claim denied. Insufficient evidence of ownership. Land transferred to Oak Haven Development Consortium. A marginal note, scrawled in a different hand, caught her eye. Questionable circumstances. See attached document, File 7B. Sarah's heart pounded. File 7B. She searched frantically, her fingers clumsy with anticipation. Finally, tucked behind a brittle map of the original Oak Haven Township, she found it. A single sheet of parchment, folded and yellowed with age. Unfolding it with trembling hands, she saw the heading. Agreement for Transfer of Land Rights. Below it, in elegant script, was a description of the land that now housed First Oak Haven Bank, followed by Silas Jefferson's mark, a simple X, and the signature of a bank representative. The final line, barely visible beneath a smudge of ink, read, Consideration, $1. Suppression tactics. The scent of old paper and stale coffee did little to mask the expensive cologne that announced Mr. Sterling's arrival. Sarah looked up from her notes, her gut clenching at the sight of him looming over her desk. His tailored suit seemed out of place amongst the cluttered cubicles, a stark declaration of wealth and power. Miss Jenkins, isn't it? His voice dripped with condescension, the kind reserved for subordinates and service staff. Sterling Bartholomew III. I believe you've been asking rather pointed questions about my family's bank. Sarah stood, meeting his gaze. Mr. Bartholomew. I'm a reporter. It's my job to ask questions. Indeed. And it's my job to ensure those questions don't malign the Bartholomew name. First Oak Haven Bank has been a pillar of this community for generations. We won't have its reputation tarnished by baseless rumors. He leaned closer, the air thick with his displeasure. I suggest you reconsider your line of inquiry. Sarah didn't flinch. I'm just looking into the bank's history, Mr. Bartholomew. I assure you, I'm committed to accuracy. Accuracy? He scoffed. Accuracy is a malleable concept, Miss Jenkins. Especially when dealing with the less fortunate. This Elijah character, for instance. A senile old man making outlandish claims. Hardly the stuff of responsible journalism. He straightened, pulling a small, embossed card from his pocket. Here's my card. Should you require any clarification on the bank's history, you may contact my office. Though I suspect, he added with a thin smile, you'll find your time better spent on more fruitful pursuits. He left as abruptly as he arrived, leaving Sarah with the lingering scent of his cologne and a chilling premonition. Her editor, Mr. Davies, summoned her to his office an hour later. The door was closed, a rare occurrence. He looked harried, his tie loosened, his usual jovial expression replaced by a tense frown. Sarah, have a seat. He gestured to the worn armchair in front of his desk. Mr. Bartholomew paid me a visit. Sarah already knew what was coming. He's concerned about your story. He made some rather persuasive arguments about the potential damage it could cause to the bank's reputation and to the community. Davies avoided her gaze, shuffling papers on his desk. He's a major advertiser, Sarah. First Oak Haven Bank keeps the lights on around here. Sarah's voice was tight. So, what are you saying, Mr. Davies? He sighed, running a hand through his thinning hair. I'm saying, we need to put the story on hold. At least for now. Maybe find a different angle. Something less controversial. The familiar surge of anger, mixed with a cold determination, coursed through her. She stood. So, you're killing the story? Davies winced. I'm reevaluating it. No, Sarah said, her voice firm. You're suppressing it. Because a wealthy man doesn't want the truth to come out. She turned and walked out of his office, the flimsy veneer of journalistic integrity crumbling behind her. The story wouldn't die. She'd find another way, even if it meant circumventing the established channels. There were alternative publications, websites, bloggers, hungry for a story like this. Mr. Sterling Bartholomew III might have silenced the local paper, but he couldn't silence everyone. Not if she had anything to say about it. The fight had just begun. The silent protest. Elijah Freeman sat on a folding chair across the street from First Oak Haven Bank. A hand-painted sign leaned against his knees. This bank stole my family's legacy. The morning sun warmed his face, a welcome contrast to the knot of anxiety twisting in his gut. Cars whizzed past, their occupants mostly ignoring him. A few glanced, curious, before speeding on. He clutched his worn leather satchel, its contents a silent testament to his claim. An hour crawled by. Then another. Just as his resolve began to waver, a woman in a bright yellow jacket stopped in front of him. Excuse me, sir. Are you protesting something? She asked, holding out a microphone. Behind her, a cameraman hoisted his equipment. Elijah straightened, his voice surprisingly steady. This bank, he said, gesturing towards the imposing building, sits on land that belonged to my great-grandfather. He was swindled out of it over 100 years ago. I'm here to reclaim what's rightfully mine. He detailed the story, the familiar words now imbued with a fresh urgency, the injustice burned anew by the camera's unblinking eye. The interview lasted 15 minutes. By the time the news crew packed up, a small crowd had gathered, drawn by the commotion. Some offered words of encouragement, others just stared. A young woman, her face etched with concern, handed him a bottle of water. Stay strong, she whispered. Meanwhile, Sarah Jenkins hunched over her laptop, the glow of the screen reflecting in her tired eyes. She'd spent the morning sifting through digitized county records, a digital archaeologist unearthing buried truths. The deeper she dug, the more she found. Deeds with suspiciously low prices, transfers with missing signatures, legal loopholes exploited with ruthless efficiency. The pieces were falling into place, painting a disturbing picture of systemic land theft. She knew the local newspaper wouldn't touch the story without irrefutable proof, and that would take weeks, maybe months. Elijah didn't have that kind of time. So, she decided to go rogue. She created a simple blog titling it, Oak Haven's Hidden History. Her first post was a concise summary of her findings, focusing on the questionable land acquisitions made by the bank's founder, highlighting several families dispossessed in the early 20th century. She included scanned images of the most damning documents, their faded ink stark against the white background. She ended with a call to action, urging readers to share the information and demand transparency from First Oak Haven Bank. Clicking publish, Sarah felt a surge of adrenaline mixed with fear. She was going out on a limb, jeopardizing her career. But she couldn't stand by and watch while history repeated itself. As if on cue, her phone buzzed. It was a text from a friend. Saw the blog. Holy crap, Sarah! You're going to shake things up. Back across the street from the bank, Elijah watched as people began to pull over, reading his sign. Some honked in support. A few even joined him, holding their own homemade signs. "Justice for the Freeman family," one read. A quiet protest was turning into something more. The sun beat down, but Elijah felt a renewed sense of hope. He knew the road ahead would be long and difficult, but he wasn't alone anymore. The exposé? The internet exploded. Not literally, of course, but Sarah's exposé, published under the stark headline, "Oakhaven's Stolen Legacy," detonated across social media like a carefully planted bomb. Within hours, #Oakhaven Stolen Legacy trended worldwide. Screenshots of historical documents, painstakingly digitized and annotated, accompanied her damning narrative. The piece detailed Elijah's direct lineage to the original landowner, Elijah Freeman, and meticulously outlined the fraudulent land transfer orchestrated by Sterling Bartholomew I, painting a portrait of systemic injustice spanning generations. The comments section was a battlefield. Some decried the article as fake news and defended the Bartholomew family's reputation, fueled by carefully crafted PR spin from the bank. Others, however, were outraged. Stories poured in from individuals who had been unfairly targeted by First Oakhaven Bank's predatory lending practices, their voices echoing Elijah's quiet resilience. Elijah himself stood on the sidewalk in front of First Oakhaven Bank, the old burlap sack resting at his feet. Passers-by, clutching their phones, stopped to stare, some whispering, others openly filming him. He remained silent, his gaze fixed on the imposing glass doors, a silent, living embodiment of the injustice Sarah had unearthed. A small group of protesters had gathered around him, holding homemade signs reading, "Justice for the Freemans," and "Return what was stolen." Inside, the opulent boardroom of First Oakhaven Bank was in chaos. Sterling Bartholomew III, his face a mottled red, slammed his fist on the mahogany table. "This is a disaster. An absolute bloody disaster." He glared at the assembled board members, their faces pale and etched with worry. "How could this peasant dredge up such ancient history? The documents are authentic, Sterling," stammered Ms. Abernathy, the bank's head of legal. "We've reviewed them. The land transfer, it doesn't hold up under modern scrutiny." "Scrutiny?" Sterling spat the word like poison. "We'll bury her in legal fees. Shut down that damn website. Ruin her reputation. I will not have my family name dragged through the mud by some nobody." "Sterling, we need to be careful," cautioned Mr. Davies, the most seasoned board member. "Heavy-handed tactics will only fuel the fire. The public is already on edge. We need a strategy, a way to mitigate the damage." Sterling ignored him, his eyes narrowed. "Find out everything you can about this woman, Jenkins. Everything. Her friends, her family, her weaknesses. I want her silenced. Permanently." He stood abruptly, knocking over his water glass, the spilled liquid spreading across the polished surface like a stain. "This ends now." The meeting adjourned, leaving behind a residue of fear and the lingering scent of expensive cologne struggling to mask the stench of desperation. Bribery and refusal. The humid air hung thick and heavy, smelling of exhaust fumes and simmering asphalt. Elijah sat on his folding stool, the handwritten sign propped against his worn boots. "First Oakhaven Bank, built on stolen land." Cars honked, some in support, others in annoyance, but he remained unmoved, a statue of quiet defiance. A black town car, polished to a mirror sheen, pulled up to the curb. Mr. Sterling Bartholomew III emerged, his tailored suit impossibly crisp despite the heat. His face, etched with disapproval, was a study in controlled displeasure. He adjusted his silk tie, a gesture that spoke volumes about his disdain for the surroundings, and approached Elijah. "Mr. Freeman," he said, his voice laced with a condescending politeness, "I believe we need to have a conversation. Somewhere more private." He gestured towards the bank's entrance. Elijah remained seated. "I'm right where I need to be, Mr. Bartholomew. The truth doesn't need privacy." Sterling's jaw tightened, but he forced a smile. "Indulge me. Just 5 minutes. My office is air-conditioned." Elijah considered him, the arrogance practically radiating off him like heat from the pavement. He slowly stood, his joints protesting with a soft crackle. 5 minutes, he conceded, his voice firm. Inside Sterling's opulent office, the air was cool and smelled faintly of lemon polish. Sterling waved him towards a leather armchair, but Elijah declined, remaining standing. Sterling settled behind his massive mahogany desk, the very picture of authority. "Mr. Freeman," he began, his voice now devoid of all pretense of civility. "This demonstration of yours is becoming tiresome. It's attracting unwanted attention. Attention that is, frankly, bad for business." Elijah met his gaze, unflinching. "The truth is never convenient for those who profit from lies." Sterling steepled his fingers, his eyes narrowed. "Let's be blunt. This claim of yours, it's preposterous. However, I'm a reasonable man. I'm prepared to offer you a settlement." He opened a drawer and pulled out a checkbook. "A generous one. Enough to buy you a comfortable retirement, perhaps a little house somewhere quiet. Away from all this." He scribbled on a check, tore it off, and slid it across the desk. Elijah didn't move, his eyes fixed on Sterling's face. The silence stretched, thick and heavy, punctuated only by the hum of the air conditioning. Finally, he spoke, his voice low but resonant. "You think you can buy my silence? That you can erase generations of injustice with a few pieces of paper?" He picked up the check, the paper thin and flimsy in his calloused hand. "This," he said, his voice rising, "is nothing but blood money. An insult to my ancestors, to my family, to everything I stand for." He tore the check in half, then again, and again, until the pieces were scattered across Sterling's pristine desk like fallen confetti. "You can keep your money, Mr. Bartholomew. I want justice. And I won't rest until I get it." He turned and walked towards the door, leaving Sterling speechless, the torn pieces of the check a stark indictment of his failed attempt at buying his way out of the past. The scent of lemons suddenly felt suffocating. Truth unveiled. The mahogany table gleamed under the oppressive fluorescent lights of the First Oak Haven Bank boardroom. Sterling Bartholomew III, a knot of crimson rage blooming on his neck, gripped the armrests of his leather chair. Across from him, Arthur Billings, head of the legal team, cleared his throat, the sound amplified in the tense silence. "Mr. Bartholomew," Arthur began, his voice tight. "The internal audit, it confirms Mr. Freeman's claims." A strangled laugh escaped Sterling. "Confirms? Preposterous. Some rambling old man with a carpet bag," he sputtered, his face contorting. Evelyn Reed, a historian hired as a consultant, sat calmly beside Arthur. Her presence had been Sterling's biggest insult of all. He'd scoffed at the idea of some dusty academic having any bearing on his family's legacy. He'd been wrong. Arthur continued, his voice gaining a sliver of steel. "The original loan documents, the ones supposedly discharged, were altered, manipulated. There are discrepancies, clear evidence of fraudulent accounting practices dating back to the early 20th century. The ledger entries, the land deeds, they've been meticulously changed." Sterling's eyes darted around the room, landing on the faces of the other board members. He saw apprehension, disbelief, and something he hadn't anticipated, disappointment. "This is absurd," he roared, pushing himself to his feet. "A smear campaign orchestrated by who even knows? This bank, this family, is built on honor." Evelyn Reed adjusted her glasses, her gaze unwavering. "With all due respect, Mr. Bartholomew, honor and historical accuracy are not always synonymous. I've examined the original county records, the probate documents, even census data. The Freeman family owned that land. Undeniably. The discrepancies in the bank's records are glaring." She produced a photostat of a faded handwritten ledger page. "Note the erasure here, the different ink used to alter the payment date. It's amateurish, really, but effective enough to dupe casual observers for decades." Sterling's bluster deflated slightly. He sank back into his chair, a sheen of sweat beading on his forehead. "But the timing," he stammered. "Why now? Why would this Freeman, this derelict, Wait so long? Arthur Billings exchanged a look with Evelyn before responding. That's a matter for the authorities to investigate, Mr. Bartholomew. But the fact remains, the bank, under your family's stewardship, illegally seized the Freeman land. A murmur rippled through the boardroom. Sterling Bartholomew III, once a pillar of Oakhaven society, now looked like a cornered animal. His reputation, his fortune, his entire world, was crumbling around him. Outside, the rhythmic chanting of Elijah Freeman's supporters echoed through the tall windows, a constant, unwavering drumbeat of truth. The old man was still there, still holding his sign, still waiting for justice. And now, it seemed, justice was finally beginning to stir. Justice served. The morning air, thick with promise, vibrated with a palpable tension. Elijah Freeman, a man sculpted by hardship, stood straighter than usual, his calloused hands clasped behind him, not in supplication, but a stance of resolute fortitude. The assembled throng had swollen, a mosaic of faces alight with expectancy and a simmering resentment aimed squarely at the imposing bank edifice that served as a backdrop. Beside him, Sarah Jenkins' laptop hummed quietly, a digital lifeline broadcasting the unfolding drama. Within the bank's gilded cage, Sterling Bartholomew III stalked his lavish office like a caged tiger, the expensive rug offering little comfort from his growing panic. "This is an unmitigated catastrophe," he bellowed at his shrinking assistant. "An absolute fiasco." He tugged at his silk tie, his complexion darkening to an unbecoming purple. The Bartholomew legacy, the family name, all threatened to dissolve like sugar in water. Then, with a heavy grind, the bank doors swung open. A flinty-eyed woman, clad in a severe business suit seemingly designed to repel empathy, advanced to the microphone. Her voice, amplified to fill the square, resonated with calculated precision. "Oakhaven Bank acknowledges the historical inequity inflicted upon the Freeman family and the people of Oakhaven." A wave of astonishment swept through the crowd. Following a thorough internal review, the bank recognizes Mr. Elijah Freeman's legitimate claim to a substantial portion of its original assets. Bartholomew nearly choked, his grip on the mahogany desk tightening until his knuckles shone bone white. The woman continued, her tone utterly devoid of warmth. "Oakhaven Bank is offering Mr. Freeman a significant settlement, encompassing both monetary compensation and a pledge to revitalize the Oakhaven community. Furthermore, we issue a formal apology for the actions of our predecessors." An explosion of sound ripped through the square. Cheers, triumphant cries, and a thunderous ovation washed over Elijah. He remained composed, his gaze fixed on the distant horizon. A lightness blossomed in his chest, a weight he had carried for decades finally gone. Once the bank representative had retreated, swallowed by the building's vast interior, Elijah approached the microphone. The cacophony died down, replaced by an expectant hush. "My friends," he began, his voice worn but vibrant, "this is more than just a personal victory. It's a triumph for us all. For the marginalized, the forgotten, and those who refuse to surrender hope." He paused, his gaze sweeping over the crowd, connecting with each face. "But this isn't an ending. It's a prologue." He declared his intention to establish the Elijah Freeman Foundation, dedicated to fueling educational advancement, bolstering local enterprise, and nurturing community growth in Oakhaven. "We will channel these resources to forge a brighter tomorrow, where opportunity knocks for everyone." Inside the bank, Bartholomew watched the spectacle on the security monitors, his expression a study in impotent fury. As the camera homed in on Elijah's face, Bartholomew detected not merely victory, but something far more chilling, an unwavering resolve. He knew, with a sinking heart, that his own descent had only just begun.